They said the trains left at dusk, yet what split the valley air was not the call of iron but a mourning too deep to belong to metal. A note stretched from the marrow of the earth itself, heavy and endless, like a bell tolling for the forgotten, the ye. Townsfolk gathered at the platform, drawn not by choice but by something older than will. The sky bruised purple early each time, as though the sun itself bowed away from what it knew was coming. The smoke rose black and low, refusing the heavens, sinking instead around the gathered crowd like ash from an invisible fire. The children came in lines, always in lines, each with a tag looped around the neck, the ink faint, as if the names had already been erased by rain or time. Some tags hung already. Blank, it was said, when the last letter vanished, the child was no longer remembered by any living tongue. Mothers bit shawls to silence their grief. Fathers clenched fists but stood still. No one dared break the ritual. To reach for your child was to invite the whistle to bend its grief upon you, and none were willing to pay that price. The conductor moved like shadow. His lantern gave no true light, only a glow that sickened the air around it. The soot on his face seemed too deep to be soot. He had all. When his hand rose, the children obeyed their steps soft against the boards, yet each knock of wood against their shoes carried across the platform, louder than thunder in the ears of the watching. One woman swore. Her son turned his head, yet the face she saw was not her boy's, it was older drained. She screamed, but her husband crushed her mouth with his hand, until blood ran at the corner of her lips. Better her silence than their ruin. The whistle sounded again, and this time it tore. The crows from the fields in storms of wings. The sound pressed into ribs, into marrow, until every heart beat in time with the rails. It was not music, but command. Inside the cars, the children sat in silence, rows of pale faces beneath dangling tags. Their mouths moved without sound, practicing a language not yet born into the world. The windows fogged, though no breath rose within. Hands pressed against the misted glass. Too many hands, more than the children who had boarded, faces multiplied upon. The panes like reflections in shattered glass. Each pair of eyes unblinking, a man whispered, "There are too many." His wife answered sharply, "You counted wrong," but he had not. The whistle screamed a final time, drawn like rusted iron across bone. The train heaved forward. The ground trembled and black smoke crawled low over boots like fingers pulling downwards. A tag tore loose from one small neck, fluttering in the engine wind. It turned and turned, then fell flat upon the track. The lantern-bearer stooped to lift it, and those nearest swore the paper was empty. Damp as if pressed to lips long without breath, when the train vanished into horizon, silence did not return. The rails exhaled slow like cooling metal. Some swore the sigh carried whispers. Children speaking their own names as ink, dissolved into nothing. The platform emptied, yet no home was free of the sound. Parents lay awake, hearing the whistle replaying endlessly, as if the train had never left, as if it circled unseen just beyond. The fields by dawn. The tracks glistened, though no rain had fallen. Along the beams, small smears of ink appeared, scattered like fingerprints crawling westward into the horizon. Those who followed swore the smudges pulsed faintly, like tags still alive. Dragging themselves toward some waiting place, the whistle returned before dusk, though no train was seen, and all knew the rails were not finished. Windows fogged from within, though no breath stirred the glass. It was as if the wood and iron themselves exhaled a cold vapor, shrouding the faces inside. The cars glowed dim with lantern light, but that light bent strangely, pooling in corners where shadows seemed thicker than walls. The benches groaned under the weight of children, yet no one spoke. Some sat with eyes closed, their lips moving silently. Others stared unblinking at the backs of those before them, as if waiting for a command that never came. The tags about their necks swung gently with the swaying of the train, but many hung blank now. A handful still bore names, though the letters ran like ink left too near fire. The conductors walked the aisles in silence, boots striking wood, slow, deliberate. When they counted, their lips moved without voice, but their eyes widened each time. For the number was never constant. One moment, the benches held 30 heads, then 33, then 36. Faces that had not climbed aboard now stared back from the shadows as if they had always been there. A girl whispered to the boy beside her, "We were 20 when we entered." The boy shook his head. No, we were 30. Another voice joined soft from the far bench. No, we were 40. Then silence. Fell heavy again, for none could agree and none dared count aloud a second time. Outside the windows, the fields blurred into endless dark. But in the fogged glass reflections stared that did not match the bodies seated. Small hands pressed from the inside, leaving streaks across the mist. Yet when one child lifted his palm to the glass, the mark that appeared was larger than his own, too large, too thin. A hand that belonged to no living child. The train jolted over a switch, and lanterns swayed. For a moment the glow revealed figures seated in the aisle itself, children where no benches stood. They blinked once, then were gone, swallowed by shadow when the lantern settled. Those who saw said nothing, for to name what should not be seen was to bind it closer. One conductor paused, his hand frozen in mid-count. His lips trembled as if he fought to form the number that pressed upon him. Instead, he snapped the ledger shut and turned away, leaving the page blank. The ink bottle at his belt rattled empty, though he had not written a single mark. The car grew colder with each mile. Breath finally rose visible, though the children themselves did not stir. The frost crawled over the glass from inside, painting veins of white, until no one could see the night beyond. Only pale outlines of faces trapped between reflection and fog. Some smiled faintly, though no mouths in the car had moved. Near the rear of the car, a small voice finally spoke. "I think we are more than children now." No one answered, but every eye turned slowly toward the voice, and in the next breath the lantern sputtered. When it caught again, there was no child in that seat at all, only a tag resting upon the bench, blank as snow, wet, as if pressed to something still. Warm. The whistle cried low through the bones of the train, carrying the sound into the marrow of all who listened. The passengers sat unmoving, eyes wide, as the count rose higher with each mile. The shadows grew thicker, the reflections sharper, and the car whispered like a hive with mouths too faint to hear. The train pressed onward into the night, and no one could tell how many rode within. The train slowed as they passed the villages, yet they never stopped. The wheels screamed against the rails, dragging iron through the silence of towns that had already forgotten how to sleep. The people locked their doors before dusk, yet the sound still slipped beneath the shutters, filling every room with a breath that did not belong. At night, strange cries drifted from the edge of the fields. Thin voices carried on the wind, like children calling names that no one spoke anymore. Farm dogs howled and snapped at empty corners of the yard. Horses shied from the water troughs, staring at reflections no one else could see. The very air trembled, as though the ground itself remembered the weight of smaller feet. Villagers whispered that when the whistle passed, the wells turned bitter. Buckets pulled up heavy with a smell of rust and something far older than water. Crops bent unnaturally as if bowing toward the tracks, their stalks rattling, though no wind stirred, and always the cries came closer, though no child was ever found. At crossroads where the trains curved, villagers began to find shoes, little shoes, pairs placed neatly side by side, others scattered as if torn loose in flight, some so small they could not have belonged to any child old enough to walk. No footprints led away from them, only the print of iron wheels pressing deeper than before. A farmer swore he saw a girl standing where the road split. Her hair hung wet, though the sky was clear, when he drew near. She lifted her foot as if to step, but her shoe was not there, only the pale outline of one pressed into the dust, and then she was gone. The echo of her cry lingered in the hedgerows until morning. Families boarded their windows, but still the sound found them. A mother whispered in her sleep, "I hear him calling my name." When she woke, her son's shoes sat by the door, though the boy himself had been gone for years, taken on a train no one ever saw return. The towns began to empty, not from choice, but from dread doors left open, hearths gone cold. The whistle's shadow stretched across empty streets where only wind moved, yet even in silence the cries remained. At the edge of every field, at the bend of every road, the faint call of children, speaking names that blurred like fading ink. One night a group of men gathered lanterns and walked the rails together. They followed the sound beyond the boundary of the village, into the black cornfields, where the stalks grew too tall, too thick. Inside they found nothing but a circle of shoes, dozens arranged with care around a hollow patch of earth, as if waiting for someone to return and claim them. The lanterns guttered all at once. When light returned, the shoes were gone. The men swore, never to speak of it, but their silence only deepened the fear. For each dawn brought more shoes to the crossroads, and each dusk carried more cries across the fields. The trains slowed but never stopped. The towns hollowed but were never emptied enough. And always the rails shone black as though polished by countless small hands pressing upward from beneath. The further the train rolled, the quieter the children became. Voices that once carried soft songs and questions turned to murmurs, then fell into silence. It was not the silence of sleep, but of something deeper, something taken from them and left. Behind at first they whispered their names aloud, repeating them as though afraid the ink would vanish too quickly. A boy tapped his chest, saying, "I am Daniel, I am Daniel." By the next town his lips still moved, but no sound came forth. Soon even the high movement of lips was gone. Their tongues stilled as though language itself had been carried away on the whistle, yet their eyes remained wide and watching, eyes that belonged to children and yet did not. Something else had moved in behind them. Something. Old and patient, staring out through faces too small to bear such weight, a conductor leaned close to one child. "What is your name?" he asked. The boy only blinked slowly, but in the fogged glass of the window, the reflection answered with a whisper of a name that was not written anywhere, not even on the tag that hung limp at his neck. The conductor stumbled back, clutching the ledger to his chest. He did not ask again. The children no longer turned to one another, no longer held hands. Each sat alone, though the benches pressed them shoulder to shoulder. Their silence filled the car heavier than the steam. Even the wheels seemed to soften their scream, as if muffled by the weight of it. At times a faint laugh rose, though no mouths moved. A laugh, not bright, not childish, thin stretched like wire pulled too tight. The sound slithered through the cars until lantern flames bent low as if bowing before it. When villagers glimpsed the windows from crossings, they swore the faces that looked out were not those of the children who had boarded older faces, stared from behind young features sharp with knowledge never taught in any school, eyes that glowed faint with reflection, though no lanterns stood near, faces blurred as if smeared on glass. Like paint running in rain, one girl's tag still bore letters, though faded. Her name was Anna. Her foster mother, who stood by the tracks, whispered it as the train passed, hoping to catch her gaze. Anna did look up, but the eyes were not hers. The mouth curled in a way the girl had never known. The mother fled before the train even cleared the bend. By dawn her house was empty, her hearth cold, her animals restless, as if driven by some unseen hand. Those who sheltered the children later spoke of nights that stretched too long. Fires burned low, though wood was stacked high. Livestock refused the barn, sniffing the air as if something waited there already, and the children sat awake. Their faces turned to the dark eyes, wide, never closing, never weeping. They did not sleep. They only waited. The names faded, but the faces remained. Faces pale against the shadows, faces pressed to glass. Faces that belonged to children, and yet belonged to something else entirely. And still the train moved forward, carrying them deeper into silence, deeper into the hollow where only eyes remained. When the trains finally scattered their passengers, the children did not vanish into the soil of the rails alone. They were carried into homes, homes that had waited for them like mouths opening to swallow what should never have been fed families. Who took them in at first believed themselves chosen. Papers were signed, though the ink was always faint. Ledgers were stamped, though the dates never seemed to hold. When neighbors asked where the records lay, the clerks shrugged as if the question itself was too heavy to keep inside those houses. The hearths burned low even when firewood was stacked high. Flames shrank and flickered, refusing to rise. Ash gathered thick in the grates, as though the wood rotted the instant it touched the coals. Rooms that once rang with warmth grew colder. With every night the child remained. Livestock stirred restless in their pens. Cows bawled through the hours before dawn. Horses stamped until their hooves split against the stall boards. Chickens refused, their nests staring at the rafters, as if something crouched above unseen. The air smelled faintly of iron, though no blood was spilled. Neighbors watched with suspicion, but they did not speak loudly, for every time a voice rose to question the new arrivals, that voice weakened within a week. Men grew pale, coughing as though soot had filled their lungs. Women heard their own names whispered from empty corners of their kitchens, and so the village learned silence again. The children did not sleep. Foster mothers tucked them beneath quilts, but when the lamps were lowered, their eyes remained wide, gleaming in the dark. Some sat upright through the night. Others lay still, but with their heads turned toward the window, as though listening to something. Outside by dawn, their gaze had not shifted. One father shook his new son awake in frustration. "Why do you not sleep?" he demanded. The boy's mouth opened, but no words came, only the faint hiss of steam, as if the rails themselves breathed through him. The man struck the boy in fear and rage. That night, the father's cattle broke through the fence and drowned themselves in the river one by one without sound. The children ate little food, left untouched, rotted quickly as though spoiled the moment. Their eyes passed over it. Yet the children did not grow thin. Their cheeks remained round their skin, pale, smooth as porcelain. Neighbors said they seemed carved rather than born. One house tried to send a child back. The father carried the boy to the station before dawn. But when the whistle rose, the platform stood empty, no trains in sight. The man turned home in dread, and when he reached his gate, the boy was already there, sitting on the step, waiting, shoes damp with dew, though no road had been walked. The neighbors swore the new children were not children at all, but none could prove it, for no records bore their names, no pages marked their arrival. When questioned, the clerks looked away, hands trembling above blank ledgers. The houses, filled with waiting eyes that never closed. The hearths grew colder, though fires still burned. The animals cried at shadows, and still the families carried on as though nothing had shifted, for to name what they had taken in would be to give it permanence. And none dared seal such a fate with words. The houses held no records, only silence, only watching, and every night the families felt as though someone else had moved in with them, someone who did not eat, did not sleep, did not leave. Beneath the streets of St. Louis, in an archive sealed with dust, there was said to be a book that no clerk wished to touch. The Black Ledger, they called it, a record of names scrawled in haste across yellowing pages, yet half of them were crossed out as though the ink itself recoiled from the task. The room was low, the ceiling pressing close like a tomb. Lantern smoke clung to the stone. The shelves sagged with forgotten files, but the ledger rested apart, locked in iron clasps. When the lock was broken, the air that rose smelled not of mildew, but of burnt hair and old iron, as though the book itself had been forged in fire. Each name listed bore the weight of a child sent west upon the trains. Yet beside so many, the lines ended in frantic marks, jagged slashes, as if the hand that wrote them shook with fear. Some pages were torn away, others soaked through with stains that no clerk admitted to spilling, and in the margins faint words appeared that did not match the hand of any man employed there. Words small, thin, written as if by a child, though no child had ever stepped into that vault. A young archivist told once of hearing whispers when he opened the ledger. Faint voices rising between the lines, calling names that were not his. He swore the ink bled darker. As he listened, spreading across the page until it covered his own hands, he fled, leaving the book open. When his colleagues found him later, he had no memory of his own family name. The older clerks refused to touch it without gloves, yet even then their fingers blackened as if soot had seeped from the page itself. The stains never washed away. Those marked so found themselves followed by the sound of a whistle at dusk, even when no train passed within 100 miles. Some never returned to the archive at all, their absence. Unrecorded, their desks left waiting like open graves. It was said one clerk tried to burn the ledger. The fire caught quickly, the pages curling, yet no ash remained. By morning the book sat again upon its shelf whole, the clasps shut as though never broken. The clerk's hands, however, blistered raw as if held to iron. He left St. Louis that night and was not heard from again. Scholars came to examine the ledger and left whispering that it grew heavier with each year, as though every name crossed out did not vanish but sank deeper into the spine, dragging the book down into silence. Those who tried to lift it said it pressed against them like stone, like bone, like the weight of countless small bodies stacked together in the dark. At times the book opened itself, pages stirring though no hand touched them. The ink upon those pages dripped slowly into the cracks of the desk below, and if one leaned too near, they swore the drops did not fall but crawled toward the edge as though searching for skin to stain. The black ledger of St. Louis remained locked in that archive, yet its pages were not still. Every dusk the air above it trembled faint with the echo of a whistle, carried far from the rails, and each dawn another name faded from memory, leaving only blank space where once a child had been. That year the cornfields rose higher than any man had seen, stalks thick as wrist sleeves, sharp enough to draw blood if you brushed against them. Fields that should have lain bare, where no seed had been sown, now stood heavy with growth swaying. Though no wind moved across the land, farmers whispered the soil had been fed too richly, not by rain, not by sun, not by care of hand, but by something else. They swore the ground had drunk deep when the trains passed, their cries seeping downward into roots that should never have been nourished. At night the fields hissed as if voices whispered between the stalks. Children's tones thin, drifting with the rustle of leaves, dogs would not enter. They bristled at the fence and howled until their throats tore. Cattle broke free in panic, refusing to graze near the edges, where the corn bent toward the tracks like parishioners bowing before a sermon they did not understand. One farmer told of standing at his porch with lantern raised. In the glow he saw small figures moving within the rows. He thought them trespassing children, until he noticed their steps left no break upon the soil. Only the plants themselves shifted, opening like mouths to let them through, then closing again, whispering, against their skin. When dawn came he walked the edge of the field. There in the dirt lay a single shoe half buried, its leather damp. Though no rain had fallen, he dug but found no foot within, no bone, no flesh, only soil black and wet smelling of iron. The harvest that year was monstrous. Ears of corn swelled thick, their kernels pale as teeth. Some cracked open before ripening their insides, crawling with threads like hair. Women who boiled the corn swore they heard faint cries as the water bubbled. Men spat seeds from their mouths, only to find the kernels warm as though still alive, pulsing against their tongues. Children of the towns refused to eat. They sat at tables staring while parents urged them on. Their eyes glimmered faint with reflection, as if lit by lanterns that were not present. One girl whispered, "The corn has already been fed, she never touched a kernel." By winter she was gone, her shoes found at the crossroads, laid neatly side by side. Some nights the farmers swore they saw the fields moving not with wind, not with storm but with hunger, rows bending inward, collapsing upon themselves as though devouring what had been planted. And yet each morning the corn stood taller, heavier, greener roots spreading deeper than ploughs could ever reach. The priests blessed the fields with water, but the leaves curled away from it hissing. The stalks grew darker, the ears heavier, and still the trains passed, carrying their silence, carrying their eyes, feeding the ground with what it craved by. Autumn no farmer walked among the rows. The hiss of whispers was too strong, the rustle too like laughter. And at night, pale faces peered from between the stalks watching, not children, not entirely, but something that had taken root beneath the farmlands and was still hungry. They said the station attic was cleared once every 10 years. Boxes stacked high trunks lined against the wall suitcases left by children who never returned. The town clerk kept a ledger with their names scratched in fading ink, but no one opened the belongings until one autumn, when the roof sagged and rain threatened to destroy what lay inside. Men carried the cases down into the hall, the leather cracked with age, the handles frayed, as if clutched too tightly before being abandoned. Each was tagged with a name, a town, a year, but when they were opened the air grew thick and cold as if the contents remembered being sealed away. Inside the first suitcase lay a doll, its porcelain face split down the middle. The crack widened when touched, as though it had been waiting. Inside another was a book of prayers, the pages stiff with something dark, soaked through every line. The third held only a handful of soil, damp and clinging, though no rain had touched it in decades. Some trunks rattled. Before the keys even turned, one burst open on its own, spilling dozens of photographs across the floor. Every picture showed the same thing: a group of children standing at a platform waiting to board, but their eyes were scratched out, gouged so deeply that the paper tore through. The schoolmistress who catalogued the items wept as she lifted a child's sweater from a case, its fabric still warm as though worn only hours before. She pressed it to her face and swore she heard a whisper, not from memory but from within the cloth itself. A name breathed in a voice that was no longer alive. The sheriff forbade the townsfolk from taking anything home. He feared curses, feared plague, feared the weight of what could not be explained. But a few carried trinkets anyway. A pocket knife, a ribbon, a locket with a faded portrait inside. Within weeks their houses were plagued with noises, doors opening in the night, footsteps on stairwells, children's laughter that froze the blood. The attic was sealed again with chains across the door. The ledger was burned, but the ashes scattered back into the same room, and the suitcases remained waiting, each one a coffin without a body, each one a name without an end. Those who worked the station swore the sound of the locks turning still echoed at night, not from the chains across the door but from inside the cases themselves, as though something within still struggled to get out. And when the trains passed slowly through the valley, the windows dark as graves, the iron wheels screaming against the track, the people swore they saw children standing at the platform, each with a suitcase at their feet, each waiting to be claimed. The first to hear it was the night watchman, a low groan of iron across the valley rails long after midnight. No schedule, no conductor, no crew. Yet the train rolled back into the forgotten yard, as though it had never left. Its whistle did not sound. Its lamps did not burn. Still it slid across the tracks with the weight of something ancient dragged behind it. The watchman swore. The engine breathed like a beast, lungs of coal heaving, though no fire burned in its belly. The cars screeched as they halted, not empty, not still. Every window streaked with handprints pressed from the inside, small palms smeared across the glass as if desperate to be seen. But no faces appeared, only the impression of presence lingering. The brakeman who dared climb. Aboard vanished within a week. Before he disappeared, he muttered to his wife that the passenger cars smelled not of dust, but of damp earth, as though graves had been uprooted and set on wheels. He spoke of rows of seats filled with shadows, the outlines, of children swaying though no breath rose from their mouths. When she pressed him for more, he grew pale and silent, clutching his chest as if every word weighed like stone. Some said the train carried those left behind, not the children who boarded, but what remained after they were stripped away, echoes, husks, fragments that clung to iron. Each time the engine returned unbidden, more marks appeared along its length, fingernail scratches dug into wood gouges along the door's symbols. No clerk or priest dared translate. Farmers who lived near the yard swore they heard singing, as the cars sat abandoned. Thin voices rising from the metal frames, carrying half-remembered lullabies. The melodies warped, broken, stretched across the rails like chords of sorrow. Those who listened too long wept without reason, unable to remember their own children's faces. One dawn, the town found the tracks themselves warped, bent into curves like ribs buried beneath the soil, as though the earth had tried to swallow the train whole but spat it back unwilling. Yet still it came returning, always returning, without conductor, without crew. The final time the sheriff ordered it burned, coal oil poured across the cars, torches pressed against the wood. But the flames refused to take. Smoke rose, but no fire caught. And in the ash of the lanterns left behind lay only fingerprints burned into the glass. Small black smudges shaped like children reaching. The train rests in the yard. Still doors, closed windows. Dim. But at night, the rails hum with something alive, and those who press their ears to the steel swear they hear knocking from within. They warned never to walk the rails after dusk, for when the sky fell silent and the valley stilled, the ground itself began to sing. At first it was only a vibration, a hum that carried through the soles of the feet like the heartbeat of something, buried deep below. Then came the voices, thin, strained, fragile as cobwebs, children's voices carried not by wind, but by the iron itself, a choir of the lost. No one knew the words, yet the sound tightened the chest and hollowed the soul. The syllables, dragged like chains heavy with sorrow. Each name spoken fell like a bell tolling for someone whose grave had never been dug. The old priest tried to bless the rails, sprinkling them with water, murmuring prayers, but the drops sizzled on the steel. as though the tracks themselves rejected heaven. He fell to his knees, clutching his ears, as the voices grew louder, swelling into hymns, not of God, but of absence. Farmers walking home at night spoke of hearing their own children's names, woven into the song. Men turned pale when lullabies once sung by their mothers echoed from beneath the sleepers and ties. One woman claimed she heard her unborn child's name whispered, though she had told no soul what she planned to call it, the station master. Set guards to patrol, yet none lasted more than a night. Their lanterns dimmed with every note, their shadows stretched unnaturally long across the gravel. One swore the stones between the rails shifted like teeth opening. He ran screaming and never returned. The choir always ended the same way, a single shriek piercing enough to split the air, then silence. The kind of silence that follows a grave being closed, and in that silence the ground trembled as if something beneath stirred restless. Something vast and waiting. Something that had learned to speak with the voices of children. Now no one dares to linger when dusk falls and the iron cools under the night. For those who remain swear they hear footsteps rising from the earth. Small measured steps pacing beneath the tracks, as if the choir itself is moving closer each night, climbing upward.